The shadow of Barad-dûr stretched long across the plains of Gorgoroth, its baleful eye sweeping the blackened land in ceaseless vigilance. Beneath the tower, armies gathered, orcs and worse, like storm clouds with iron teeth. The air stank of cinder and fear. It was then that the world buckled. A tremor like a struck bell rang through rock and ruin. Over the blasted ash flats, light turned inside out. A seam appeared in the sky, no crack of thunder, but a wound that pulsed with colors Middle-earth had no names for. The nearest orcs hissed and scrambled back, slavering blades raised as if steel could shear the air itself. The seam widened. Heat and wind burst outward, flinging grit like knives, rattling the burned bones that peppered the plain. For an instant, the wound showed a place of blue and green and clean air. Then the opening convulsed and a figure fell through. He curved through the blast, arms crossed before his face, cape whipping like a banner torn from a lost battlement. He struck the ground with the restraint of a man who knew what his strength could do and would not do it. The shockwave came anyway. Concentric rings raced from his boots, dust skimming to the horizon and sending orcs sprawling like reeds. He rose without a scratch, red and blue against the ashen world, eyes the color of a deep sky that did not exist here. He turned his face upward. The wound writhed above him, shrinking, fraying. He kicked off the ground and rose straight into its gusting heart. Fingers blurred. He caught invisible edges and knitted them, palm to palm like a sailor coaxing a sail in a storm. Heat burned his hands. He blew a long, controlled exhalation, freezing the fever of the air until the glare dimmed and the seam sutured itself with a sound like cooling glass. The sky was whole again, scarred in a ring but sealed. He hovered a breath, listening to a world he had not meant to visit. Nothing human breathed nearby save fear. On the horizon, a red stare brightened. He knew a gaze when he felt one. This was not sight, not truly. This was malice made into attention. It scraped him like sand in a wound. Magic, he thought, with that calm, practical note he kept even when the impossible tried its hardest. Not the kind he knew. Not one he could wrestle head-on without cost. He dropped back to earth. The orcs that had not fled gathered with spear and scimitar, jabbering. He lifted his hands empty. "Don't," he said, and the word carried farther than a man's voice ought to carry. They lunged anyway. He moved once, twice, and they were no longer a threat. Blades fell away in neat curls from pinprick lines of heat. A troll's charge broke as he stamped the ground and raised a crescent of turned earth that spilled the beast onto its back. He did not break bones when he could avoid it. He did not kill if he could choose otherwise. That rule had not changed because the stars on the map had. Above all of it, the eye flared. He looked away, not in fear, but in respect for a battlefield truth. Do not give the enemy the angle he wants. He lifted his sight beyond visible things, past smoke and the rot glow of the fires. He heard iron harnesses squeal miles off, counted footfalls like rain, felt the faintest ripple. There, a smaller power moving east to west, a burden carried with a will too stubborn for its size. He could not read thoughts, but he knew resolve when he heard it in the rhythm of a breath that refused to break. "Whoever you are," he said to the far horizons, "hang on." Wind snapped his cape as he rose. Gorgoroth fell away, a field of scars. The tower of Barad-dûr stabbed at the sky like a broken tooth. The eye brightened again, as if to glare him back. He felt the sting of it along his skin, the way he sometimes felt certain kinds of magic like static under thunderheads. He angled away from the beam of its attention. No flight, only the choice of a man who would rather be useful than dramatic. The land changed under him. Charcoal plains giving way to cracked ridges, ridges to scrub, scrub to the ghost of grass. Even the wind shifted from furnace to breath. He skimmed a line of cliffs and saw far beyond white walls sunlight loved. A city stepped like a mountain, its terraces glittering even through the haze of war. Between him and that brightness lay broken bridges and the corpse of a river crossing. The ground crawled with preparations, the Dark Lord's hosts thickening like flies, siege beasts stamping, ladders like thorns. He could be there in a heartbeat. He could be everywhere in 1,000. He could not be everywhere at once. He slowed, hovering over a scar of trenchworks where goblins hustled. He listened, not to words, but to rhythms. Fear made a staccato. Discipline was a drum. He mapped the patterns, not in ink, but in possibilities. He had done this before on worlds where the sky had other colors. He would do it again here with the tools this world allowed him. Speed, strength, sight, voice, and a refusal to make himself the ruler just because he could be. A shriek split the haze. It had no throat in it, only frost. A ringed shadow circled high, tattered cloak dragged by a mount with wings like a bat's nightmare. A Nazgul, men here called it. He had fought creatures made of nothing a man should touch with his hands. He did not reach for it. He turned his face and caught the sun full on, cupped light with both palms and flashed it back. The fell beast reeled, membrane smoking where brilliance found thinness. He felt the brush of will from the rider, cold, insistent, and older than the language of the scream. He set his jaw and held place. The thing wheeled away, unwilling to stoop where light made armor of air. He turned again toward the White City. The nearer he flew, the more lives he heard. A mother sang under her breath to a child too old to be sung to. A captain rehearsed orders in his head to keep his voice from shaking when he would shout them. Far below, a lone soldier recited a list of names, each name a knot to tie himself to the earth. He learned a city by how it sounded at the edge of fear. He banked north, skirting smoke that smelled of bitumen and despair. The eye had turned. He could feel it, not on him this time, but to the west, to something moving there that mattered more to it than any stranger fallen from a wound in the sky. He let it forget him. He wanted it to forget him. From here the road ran to a ruin, and from the ruin to those shining walls. The ruin had a name he had heard carried on the wind in a score of voices. Osgiliath. In the spelling of the mouths he heard it with. Grief around the consonants. He paused above its bones long enough to see how water still moved under the broken arches, making a sound that was not mourning and not triumph, but the river being a river. He took the sky again. The city rose. He could have entered without knock or horn. He would not. He did not land on the outworks or the gate. He came to a jut of stone that stood between the city and the plain like a great ship's prow. There he hovered, hands open, cloak streaming in the east wind that smelled of ash and something faintly sweet the city kept safe behind its walls. "Gondor," he said softly, to a place that did not yet know his name. "I'm here to help if you'll have me." Below, startled figures moved along the battlements. Horns cried, some in alarm, some in wonder. He did not move closer. He let them see him as he wished to be seen. A man, not a master. A shield, not a spear turned inward. He listened for a command, a welcome, a warning shot. The eye still burned to the east. He could feel it on the edge of his skin. A prickle like needles in winter. He squared himself to it without turning his face that way. He had done this before. He would do it again. He could stand for as long as they needed to decide. And above all that, beyond the city stone in the far turned dark, he still heard the small, brave heartbeats walking toward a fire the world had been built around. He wished he could fly to them and carry them the last miles. He would not. He had learned hard in other wars that sometimes the hardest part of helping is letting someone else do the work they were chosen for. He hung there in the last light, between a tower that hated everything living and a city that still sang under its breath, waiting to be called. Chapter 2. Whispers in the west. The seam in the sky sealed, but its echo ran ahead of the stranger like thunder that forgot how to die. In Riendell, Eland looked up from ancient scrolls, the ink on his brush trembling though his hand did not. Wind crossed the hidden valley with a brightness it had not carried since the dawn of older ages, and the elf lord felt a presence that was not of Arda, familiar in its courage, alien in its making. In the forests of Lothlorien, Galadriel stood beside a still bowl and watched the water silver. The mirror showed a blur at first, then a man who was not a man, red cloak biting at ash wind, blue cloth like a shard of day. Her eyes grew distant, and light kindled in them. "A light that does not belong to our story," she murmured, and the leaves consented with a whisper like rain on gold. In Isengard, the corrupted Sauron paused in his machinations. Whitestone heard the click of a staff and the tilt of a head as the old master turned toward the east. He sensed a disturbance in the long weave of power that bound Middle-earth together, something neither Ringcraft nor lore had accounted for. It was not the enemy's will. It was a vector crossing all accustomed lines, and it would not be tamed by Palantir or promise. And in the white city of Minas Tirith, the steward Denethor sat in a shadowed chamber where a cold light bruised the dark. He pressed his fingers to his eyes and hissed as a pressure, new and uninvited, grazed the edge of his thoughts. Servants spoke to him. He waved them away and listened to a silence full of marching. He had watched too much through the stone. Sleep had become a dry place with sharp corners. Now another weight leaned upon the city he loved, and he could not decide whether it felt like hope or grief. Where the torn river crossed the ruins of Osgiliath, he slowed. Stone teeth bit the current. Reeds bent and whispered. On the far side, shields moved along ramparts. From Osgiliath, the road climbed toward the city that shone like a promise. Minas Tirith rose tier on tier, white where light touched it and gray where smoke leaned. The plain bore fresh scars, From the walls came the thin keen of a horn, and then another, and then the steady thrum of preparation, which sounded like a heart learning a braver rhythm. He hovered above a shoulder of stone half a bowshot from the lowest gate. Archers notched. A captain swore softly and corrected a line. Boys in 2 large helmets tried not to point. He showed open hands and no weapon. The wind took his cloak and wrote his intentions in red over white stone. "Hold!" someone shouted from the battlements. "Hold!" echoed another voice, steadier, trained by habit to land on the note that would stop a panic before it began. The stranger neither advanced nor drifted back. He took the city's measure as a physician takes a pulse, not by counting, but by feeling how it wanted to beat. In the 7th circle, Denithor rose from his chair. His hand trembled once, then stilled as he touched the arm carved with leaves from trees he had never seen. He walked from shadow into light and called for Faramir, then caught himself, because that name was a wound, and he could not bleed in front of servants. "Send for the captains," he said instead. And the steward of Gondor moved with the grave grace of a man who has learned to wear his grief so that it looks like dignity. Messengers climbed and descended, and rumor learned to stand at attention. One paused at a narrow slit and peered out, and the breath left him at what he saw hovering over the prow of stone. "A man," he told the next stare he met, though the word felt wrong. "A man who shines." The phrase ran across landings and through courtyards like a rumor that wanted to be a prayer and did not dare. Down at the lowest gate, a woman pressed a hand to her child's hair and stood on tiptoes until the child stood taller without moving. "You there," a voice cried from the wall. "What banner do you bear?" He answered without moving closer. "None. I bear a promise." Above them, a Nazgul curved and then wheeled away from the glare flashing off his chest. At the gate, a wicket opened. A single figure stood inside it. On the wall, the archers shifted their stance, not because a command barked, but because habits older than panic woke in them. One man loosened his fingers and felt the bow settle again against the pad below his thumb. Another measured the wind with the edge of a feather and found it steadier than he had feared. A third realized he could breathe without tasting ash. Small mercies travel faster than doom when someone reminds a city how to stand. "Wait there," the guard said. "The steward will be told. If you mean us well, you will not take offense at caution." Caution was a prayer where he came from. He accepted it like bread. He stepped back one pace so that no frightened archer would feel crowded, and so that every gaze could keep him whole in its sight. He lifted his chin toward the east, toward Barad-dûr, toward the red star that never closed. The look stung him again, a prickle in the nerves like cold iron pressed too long against skin. He did not look away. He did not answer it either. He let it tire of staring at a man who would not blink on command. Time passed in small duties. The drums faltered, then steadied again. At last, hoofbeats clattered upward. A messenger leaned from saddle and spoke a word that shivered along the stones. The wicket opened wider, not a welcome, not yet, but an invitation to speak without shouting. The stranger did not fill the offered gap. He stood where the shadow of the gate ended and the day began. "Tell your steward this," he said. "I will help. I will follow your orders here. I will not bend you to oaths." The messenger stared as if he had been handed a thing too fine for dirty hands. "You speak as if you know us," he blurted. "I know people," the stranger answered. "And I know the sound of fear that refuses to break." He lifted his gaze not to the man but to the city behind him. He heard 100 small songs, the kind a city sings to itself when it is tired and still chooses duty. He thought of the 3 small travelers westward, and the way courage sounded in their feet on broken stone. "Wait," the messenger said again, and was gone in a churn of hooves and echo. Above the gate, archers relaxed by breaths, not by inches. The stranger stood his watch as if he belonged to the wall and the sky both. Out on the plain, the drums thickened. Far off, under the eye of Barad-dûr, the hosts of the east changed their marching into something sharper. And on the stone before the gate, the stranger waited to be summoned. He had flown half a world by now. He could have crossed it again in the time the gate took to open or not. Instead, he kept still. Behind him, Gorgoroth smoked. Before him, Minas Tirith breathed. Between them, he chose to be a bridge and not a blade. Chapter 3. Steward and Stranger. The wicket in the great gate opened fully, not like a mouth welcoming a guest, but like a visor lifting just enough for eyes to meet. He did not step through until the captain inside, gray around the temples, clean in his stance, nodded once exactly, the gesture a city gives an unknown that has chosen patience. Inside the first circle, Minas Tirith was narrower than it looked from the air and deeper. Everything from cobbles to lintels had the care of hands that tuned stone as if it could sing. The stranger did not touch anything as he walked. He measured the place the way a surgeon measures a heartbeat, listening to the way fear tugged at the rhythm, and then learning where the rhythm fought back. Banners whispered. The clink of mail did not hide the tiny music of people going on with living despite siege and smoke. A woman's bucket scraping the lip of a well, oil poured into a lamp, a dog making itself small so a cart could pass. He kept his hands uncovered, palm lines plain, and the guards walked with him, neither crowding nor drifting back. The captain spoke without looking up. You said you will follow orders here. I did, the stranger answered. You have a command, and it would not help your men if I broke it. Do you have a name? The captain asked after a beat. On my world, he said with a small, not quite smile. They call me Superman. The captain's mouth tightened. Not in mockery, but because he did not know where to set a word like that on the shelf with the rest of the city's things. Very well, he said. Superman, you will speak with the steward. The climb was long. Minas Tirith rose not like a tower hammered upward, but like a mountain taught manners. The city breathed in circles, each ring a rib pulling air. At each gate, the escort changed, and the stranger heard the same instructions given in different voices, and knew discipline when he heard it. He did not hurry them by word or motion. He had learned long ago that forcing another's tempo was a way of breaking trust, and that trust, broken, is a bridge that falls at the worst moment. At the fifth circle, they passed a courtyard where boys too, young for war, held bows too tall for their arms. An old sergeant guided their hands with a patience that had nothing to do with time. The stranger's head tilted almost imperceptibly, as if to give the scene the respect a salute would have given another soldier. The sergeant saw without letting on that he had seen, and nodded in his bones. At the seventh circle, the wind tasted clean again. The White Tower cast a long, cool shadow over a court paved smooth by centuries of armored feet. The doors opened without trumpet. Inside, the light was thinner, as if the stone drank. The hall's length and height did not exist to make men feel small. It existed to remind them to carry their weight upright even when tired. A chair sat at the foot of an empty throne. The man in the chair wore a face like a last winter that refused to yield to spring because it knew another winter would come. Steward Denethor, the captain announced, and then held his breath as if something in him did not want to speak into this room. The steward's eyes took the measure of the red and blue, the broad shoulders, the calm mouth that had not learned Gondor's court forms but did not need to. You come unbidden in strange raiment, and your first act is to hover over my gate like an omen, Denethor said, voice very even. If you mean Minas Tirith well, you have a curious way of proving it. I meant to be seen, the stranger answered. Sometimes fear grows when it has nowhere to look. I gave it a place to go. Denethor's mouth did not change. Names. On my world, he said again, they call me Superman. On mine, Denethor said, we call ourselves men, and then prove it by our acts. He did not gesture to the empty throne. What do you want of Gondor? To help, the stranger said. No pledge, no oath, no rank offered to claim or refuse. Just that word, laid as lightly as a hand over a burning brow. I'm not here to rule you. I'm here to stand with you while you stand where you already are. Denethor leaned slightly forward, not because the words had pleased him, but because he smelled a trap and meant to find it with a spear point. You speak as if you could stand anywhere you chose. I can stand quickly, the stranger admitted. But choice is a different thing. The steward watched, not the mouth or the hands, though he saw those, but the way the stranger's gaze moved, not restless, not fixed, attentive without appetite. Others have come, calling themselves counselors. The white-clad wizard claims friendship. A ranger claims blood, now a Superman. He spoke the name carefully so that it would not change shape. Do you all come in one season because the shadows lengthen, or because you smell a harvest? Because a fire is being carried into a mountain, the stranger said, and Denethor's fingers convulsed once on the arm of the chair. The stranger's eyes did not flicker toward the niche where a stone sat wrapped in a cloth. He did not need to look. He heard the way the steward's breath shortened when the east was named, how the pulse hammered in the throat then hid, how the pupils took light badly in this hall, and widened too fast at talk of the eye. He had learned to hear strain where other men saw stubbornness. You speak of things you should not know, Denethor said softly. unless you have put your eyes where mine have gone." "I'm not looking through your stone," the stranger said, simple and clean. "You've watched too much through it. It leaves marks on a man even when he sleeps. It's there, in your breath, in your hands. It's a hard weight to carry alone." Denethor's head snapped a fraction, pride flaring like a blade pulled a finger's width from a scabbard. "Do not presume to read me, Outlander. I don't read minds," the stranger said. "I listen. If you tell me I'm wrong, I'll believe you." Silence rippled, then settled. The door at the far end opened a handspan. Footsteps paused, then withdrew. The hall held the tension the way a bow holds wind. "What would you have us do then?" Denethor asked at last. Bitterness under the iron gone quiet. So quiet it could almost be grief. "You who fall out of the sky with your promise and your courtesy. Shall I give you the keys to the city and watch you turn us into a banner for your kind of hope?" "Keep your keys," the stranger said. "Keep your city. Give me a map room, a bell I may answer, and captains I can brief in the time between horns." Denethor had not expected that request. He was too clever to show that he had not expected it. "And in exchange? I'll do what I can do. Lift what others can't, move where others can't. But I'll not give orders over your own men. I've been a symbol before. I know the danger of symbols when they start thinking they're kings." The steward's eyes narrowed with a very faint, very reluctant interest. "You refuse to command?" "I refuse to take your command," the stranger said. "I'll take your requests, your warnings, your judgment when I err. If a crown comes back to this city, it won't be mine." A breath that might have been a laugh if it had been fed for years came from Denethor's chest. He leaned back. He was very good at leaning back in a way that made other men lean forward. The stranger did not. Far below, a horn cried. Not long and high as when boys practice in courtyards, but short and sharp, the note that says a runner has come up sweating because he did not dare shout before he reached the walls. The captain at the stranger's side did not look to Denethor. He looked to the stranger, and the stranger kept his gaze on the steward. "Your orders, Lord." "Bring him to the map room," Denethor said, and only then allowed himself to glance toward the door, where a messenger stood as if nailed to his shadow. "Report. From Mean Morgul," the man said, breath scraping. "A force across the ruins at Osgiliath. Numbers heavy, trolls among them. Our men at the river outworks fall back." The stranger's head tilted, and the veins in his temple stood for a heartbeat as he listened across miles. He did not speak the count he felt. He did not speak of the sweating of the harness leather, or the number of times the orcs had been made to turn their heads left in drill before their captain understood that discipline could be beaten in as well as learned. He said, "You'll need time." "We always do," Denethor said, and stood. "Captain, Lord, open the gate," the captain swallowed. "To let them in when they run?" "To let him out before they reach it," Denethor said, and his mouth twisted, not with humor and not with pain. "If we are to test a promise, we should not do it behind shutters." The stranger did not bow. He inclined his head the way a man accepts a task he would have taken anyway. "I'll keep it as clean as I can," he said. "Clean," Denethor repeated, tasting the word as if it were a fruit from a season he could not recall. He sat again. "Do not squander my men for the sake of spectacle, Superman. If you must choose between a song and a life, remember which will not feed a child." "I have never eaten a song," the stranger said gently. "I'll bring them back if I can." He turned and walked the length of the hall with the same unhurried stride he had used to come in, as if leaving slowly could teach the city that haste was a tool to be used, not a fever to be caught. At the door he paused and looked back once, not at the empty throne but at the man who sat below it and wore its shadow like a cloak he had grown accustomed to. The stranger said nothing because some promises are made with the back, not the mouth. Then he was gone, and the tower breathed out as if it had been holding that air against its own will. On the way down, the captain spoke without turning his head. "If you die, Outlander, it will be in the plain, where the men can see you, and you will help them while you fall." "If I fall," the stranger said, "it will not be on them." "We have no word for you," the captain said. "I think we will have to make do with the one you brought." The lower gates boomed. The White City's throat cleared itself and prepared to sing what it could. The stranger stepped out into the light. The plain of Pelennor lay spread like a palm, lines and scars in its skin. To the east, the drums thickened. To the west, a wind pulled at his cape as if to say, "Go carefully. This is not your story, but you are in it." He nodded to nothing, to everything, and rose just enough that when the men on the wall looked down, They did not feel small. "Open the gate," the captain called again, and the hinges groaned like great oxen turning. The city watched its own breath leave and took another. The stranger flew forward along the white road toward the ruin where the river broke, not in a streak that burned the eyes, but at a speed that let a child on the fourth circle see him go and whisper to her father, "He is moving," and for the father to answer, "Aye," with a steadiness borrowed for a moment from that red and blue. When he reached the broken teeth of Osgiliath, he did not look for an enemy to crush. He looked for lines, choke points, the places where a handful of men could become a wall if given a wall to lean against. The enemy came on like weather, predictable in the large, vicious in the small. He could not change the weather, but he could teach a city how to hold an umbrella without letting the wind tear it to ribbons. He breathed once, long and slow, and the air turned cool where his breath went. "All right," he said to no one, to everyone, "let's keep this clean." Chapter 4. Proof at the Gate. They came in a black tide from Min Morgul, the nearer ranks a froth of blades and bad breath, the farther ranks a smear of metal that moved with the brutal confidence of numbers. Banner cloths hacked from human tents fluttered from pikes hacked from human fences. Trolls hunched among them like moving towers, chain and hook slick with their last work. Above, the sound that was not a bird's voice tore the light into long, thin shreds. Nazgul circling, fell beasts tasting the air with tongues the eye could not see. Between that tide and the White City lay the ruins of Osgiliath, and between Osgiliath and the gate stood a single figure in red and blue, high in the air at first, so that every man on both sides could see him, and then lower, so that he could work. Gondor's outmost skirmishers fell back in good order over the stones. Shields angled the way they had been taught so that a man could look without giving his neck. The stranger swept once along their line, not touching any of them, but leaving. Behind him a wake of air that set their cloaks streaming toward the city. The wind in their faces burned less. Breath went down easier. A man fights better when his chest does not hurt. Superman dropped to the broken roadway where the white stones showed under ash. His boots struck and did not crack the stones because he did not let them. He put his palms to the ground as a wrestler puts his to an opponent's shoulders and pushed. At this point, a man could use the word earthquake and be forgiven, but the ground did not heave randomly. It split in a crescent trench exactly, where he wanted the front rank to stumble, a shallow bite that would trip knees and tangle spears without swallowing anyone's life. Dirt fountained in a smooth arc. The first line of orcs hit the lip of the trench and went down like a row of bad intentions. Arrows hissed from the walls behind him. He turned his head and blew. The shaft of his breath caught a volley that would have fallen short and carried it the last yards with just enough lift to find its mark. He had been taught as a boy to blow out candles on the cake without spitting. It turned out that was good training for war as well. A troll lumbered forward, chain drum beating time on its own chest. He met it with one step, put his hands on the chain as if it were a plow handle, and lifted. A troll expects weight to be a friend. When weight betrays it, its mind falls through the floor. The chain rose like a gate. The troll blinked, surprised into stupidity, and by the time thought returned, a wedge of Gondor spears had bristled under its armpit with the efficient malice of necessity. The troll went over backward, not dead yet, but out of the line where it could do harm. He did not finish it. Gondor's men knew how to make a kill clean. He had other work. Heat vision ran in pencil lines, not floods. He drew a line along the halves of a dozen pikes and watched the iron head sag off like overripe fruit. He never put the beam on flesh. An orc lunged with a scimitar. When the blade touched his forearm, sparks leapt, and the orc's eyes widened in the half-second before the stranger set him down in a drift of ash on the safe side of the trench with the delicacy of a nurse setting down a sleeping child. The orc scrambled up, unharmed, furious, humiliated, and charged again. The stranger pointed. No! The orc found itself sliding backward, not by magic, but because its boots had found the glassy edge where heat had passed, and the ash made a lubricant as treacherous as ice. From the air, a Nazgul stooped. The fell beast's scream bit his bones, set his fillings thrumming. He could feel the rider's will like the cold of iron, not in his mind. No, that path was closed by biology and training both. But along the skin, a pressure trying to bruise. He let it try and did not let it in. He raised his hand and caught sunlight on his palm. The cape took it, red as a flag at dawn. He flicked the cloth and the light went, bladed into the eyes of the descending beast. It shrieked and banked away. The rider hissed words that cracked the air, and those words did not touch him the way words touch men here. Magic likes to find seams. He did not offer one. The beast climbed and the Nazgul worked a circuit higher, hunting for an angle that would hide the sun and smother the light. He made a small sound in his throat, not a challenge, not a taunt, just the sort of noise a farmer makes when telling a horse to mind itself. And then he was gone, and then he was there, halfway up the beast's climb, 2 fingers flicking the leathery edge of a wing just so. A seam parted. The wind took it. The beast flapped wildly. The rider remained mounted through skill born of 1,000 malice-trained years. Good. He did not want a fall that would put prophecy into a tangle with mercy. "Find another sky," he said, and the beast, smart enough to know physics even if it did not know fear, spiraled wide and away to seek an approach that would not blind its own eyes. Below, the black host surged, then stuttered, then surged again. An Oliphant, one of the great southern beasts with tower and bells, shouldered toward the white road, the Mahout slapping it into anger. Superman moved, not to strike, but to frame. He ran along the outer edge of the beast's path and used the edge of his hand like a trowel, shaving a shallow berm that would turn a foot the way a curb turns a carriage wheel. He clapped once, cupping the air to avoid breaking ears on the wall and cracking only the patience of the men who wanted to see what this foreigner would do. The sound burst hit the Oliphant not like a blow but like a new instruction in the language its bones spoke. It turned with its whole body, slow and unstoppable, and plowed a swath through the ranks that had meant to use it as a ram. Tower wood groaned. Men shouted in tongues that did not love white stone. He did not rejoice when they fell. He redirected a falling spar so that it missed a Gondorian captain by a finger's breadth. The captain did not know he had not been killed. That is the way a good rescue feels. It makes no song because the singer walks away breathing. At the trench, orcs tried to bridge with ladders. He set his shoulder to one ladder and lifted and threw it back not into faces, but to one side where it rattled and made frustration louder than courage. He stamped once, not hard, and the edge of the trench squared itself, and a dozen boots scuffed forward and caught. He drew his breath and let it go over a slick of spilled oil, not the kind men use for lamps, but the rank stuff that choices are sometimes. Made of when men are tired and desperate and take what they can from the stores of the fallen. Frost grew quick as a lie, and just as treacherous, and the next rank went down not in blood but in bruises. An orc struck at his side where the cloth did not look like armor. The blade shivered on his ribs as if it had asked to be forgiven, and then had slipped anyway. He took the orc by the wrist and broke the rhythm of the strike and set him down. "Go," he said, and sent him sliding into the shadow where the will from the east faltered for a breath, and let the creature remember that it had once been something else. A spear came at his back, and he heard it before it left the thrower's fingers. He caught it as a juggler catches the club that should have been there by now, and ended up holding not a weapon but a new line on the field. He rammed the haft into cracks between stones, made a rail for the next man who would run this way wounded. He was always making rails. That was his work, to give other men a thing to hold when their hands had nothing but fear. He felt it then, the difference between iron and iron cursed. A blade kissed his shoulder and laid a cold across his skin that went deeper than the bite. The cloth smoked. The wound was thin as a paper cut and wrong. He hissed a little, mostly because the sensation told him something important. What he had always known about magic and other worlds worked here too. It was not an enemy he could take in his hands. It was a weather to be respected. He shifted, stopped meeting enchantment with flesh and turned to the work that flesh could do better. Catching, lifting, turning, bracing. Behind him, men of Gondor rallied. He heard the captain from the gate in the rhythm of shouted names. Squads pulled back not as sheep but as pieces moving on a board someone had sanded smooth during the night march and set fair on a table that would not wobble when the legs were jostled. He heard the archer's cadence improve, the pauses between volleys becoming useful, not frightened. He heard a boy's voice break and then steady, and he heard another voice, older, quieter, borrow steadiness from the break and lend it back doubled. "Form on me," the captain shouted from the ruins near side, and hearing his own voice strong in his own throat made him taller. "Shields!" Step, step!" The stranger did not echo. He made the steps easier. When the captain called step, stones did not roll. When he called shields, fragments that would have cut ankles whispered aside as if a broom had passed. The black tide hit the trench again, filled part of it with bodies and broken timber, surged. He did not try to stop a tide with hands. He taught it to spend itself where the land did not care. He cut a groove with one heel that led the flow to the right, then another that sent the right-hand flow to a pocket where the arrows fell like rain that wants crops, not rot. He went up, not far, and clapped again, and the pressure wave slid along the front ranks, not knocking them flat but taking a breath out of 1,000 chests at once. And in that emptied breath Gondor moved, spears forward, shoulders together, and made new ground out of ground that had already decided to be lost. There is a kind of alchemy that needs no sorcery. Give a man one heartbeat without fear, and he makes 3 of courage out of it. The Nazgul came again. 2 of them now, working angles with a hunter's patience. He rose to meet them, not into their claws but into the sun. His eyes narrowed against the glare. He put his hands together, palms hollow, and slapped, not air this time, but sound itself, and the shock rolled up and out and made the fell beast's bones hum in a key that was not built for battle. They flinched, screaming not with terror but with the indignity of a body forced to hear itself. He darted in and caught a bridle chain, a contemptible thing in his hand, and broke it, and the beast, suddenly unguided, did not fall. It climbed, frantic, the way a horse will do when the bit is gone and a cliff is near. The rider's head turned toward him, empty where a face should have learned regret. It hissed and spoke a word that made the air crack. The crack ran along his skin like ice on water and went no deeper. "Find another field," he said, not loud, and the beast did. "Time works strangely in battle. A minute is a page. An hour is a sentence. A look is a chapter." How long did he spend among stones and arrows? Long enough to sweat, not because he was tired, but because effort is honest work even for the strong. Long enough for a dozen small rescues to add up to a dozen lives that would tell stories in a dozen kitchens tonight, if kitchens lived to see fire. Long enough for the black tide to learn a new rhythm, not crashing but gnashing, held at the teeth, wearing its own edges down. When the push finally slowed, it did not do so evenly. There is a moment when any host realizes whether it has momentum or only mass. He felt that moment as a change in the sound, a slackening of the drum skin under a drummer's hand. He did not pursue. He did not transform defense into slaughter. He stepped into the trench he had cut and smoothed its edge with his heel, and made it clear that this was a line not to be crossed today. He raised one hand, not in triumph, but in signal to the wall. Stand easy if you can for a breath. Reload. Drink. The orcs faltered, snarled, shoved. Somewhere in the rear, a whip cracked the way men crack whips when they have nothing else to make, and the sound did what it could. But will from far away does not always bridge a river. He watched the leader among the front ranks, a larger orc with chain around his waist and the flat stare of a bad captain, measure him and decide. The orc spat and drew a circle in the ash with his blade and took one hard step back, and the line took it with him. Retreat! No! Recognition! The work today would not be done by numbers. It would be done by a different cruelty and a different day. The line settled. He did not grin. He did not move to the front like a man who wants his name shouted. He turned without flourish and flew backward along the white road, low and slow enough that men could keep him in sight and carry his steadiness into their legs. On the wall, the captain who had warned him not to die breathed out a curse that was also a blessing. The gates received him. The city drew him in like a lung-pulling air. Inside, the courtyard burst, not into cheers, not at first, but into motion that was not panic. Runners ran without bumping. Water sloshed. A boy dropped his bow and then remembered and picked it up and unstrung it the way he had been taught to do before he ever learned how to string it. The stranger set a wounded man down on a cloak spread by hands that did not shake. He looked up and found the captain's eyes. "Your men did that," he said, meaning the line, the step, the breath held and released at the right time. "Keep doing it. You'll need it again." "How many?" the captain asked, and did not specify whether he meant enemies, wounded, minutes. "Enough," the stranger said, "but not all at once, not today." Above them, the red eye burned steady and mean. It had watched the whole thing and learned something it had not wanted to learn. That hope can be disciplined, and that discipline makes a poor feast. The stranger felt the look again, like cold laid over warm skin, and lifted his chin a degree. He would not bait that gaze. He would let it spend itself where it would not matter. The men on the wall began to talk, not loudly, not with foolishness. but with voices that had room in them now for something besides breath. Someone laughed once sharply, because he needed to prove to himself that he still could. The laugh did not echo. The city kept it. He turned toward the White Tower. He did not stride like a conqueror. He walked as a man walks who knows he will be asked to do this again soon, and who is already measuring what he can give and what he must save. He would go up. He would give Denethor his count of things that could be counted. He would ask for the bell he had named, and the bell would be rung, and he would answer. At the foot of the long stair he paused, as if to fix a strap or adjust the fall of his cape. But what he adjusted was a feeling that had crept up on him, a too familiar tug. The one that says, "You could hold all of this in your two hands if you just closed them." He opened his fingers on purpose. He looked back at the men on the wall, at the boy in the courtyard, at the sergeant in the fifth circle who would be cutting new bowstrings as the sun went down. "You've got this," he said, not loud, but it sounded in the stones. Then he went up to face the steward, not to ask for a throne, but to ask for a map and a bell. He had given his proof. He would give more if asked, but he would not take what was not his. That was the shape of the promise he had brought through the wound in the sky, and it would hold, even under the eye. Chapter 5. The White Rider returns. Word of the rout at Osgiliath ran through Minas Tirith like a new wind that did not taste of ash. It did not become a cheer. Gondor had learned not to spend its voice on anything but work, but hands steadied on buckles and water tasted less like metal. And in the seventh circle, a steward sat straighter in his chair because he would not give a stranger the courtesy of watching him sag. Horns sounded again, this time not in warning but in heralding. Riders approached from the north, a company small in number and long in rumor. At their head came an old man in white upon a silver horse who moved like riverlight over stone. Beside him, a man with a ranger's steadiness and a king's center of gravity. Behind them, the long friendship of elf and dwarf walked in step. Near them, smaller folk with large eyes measuring a city that measured them back. The gates opened. They entered not with fanfare, but with a familiarity that said this was not the first time they had come to the aid of the West or the last. The captain who had watched the stranger fly returned to watching the road. Habit saves more lives than spectacle. In the White Tower, the chamber took them all in. Denethor on his chair, the empty throne above him like a problem whose answer would not be forced. Superman standing to one side, the blue of his suit a piece of daylight pinned to the wall. The air held two kinds of power and two kinds of patience. The old man's eyes met the stranger's. Surprise crossed Gandalf's face and then wore itself down into concern, and then into something more careful. Respect that refused to be dazzled. "What manner of being are you?" Gandalf said, staff finding its ease against the floor. "Who falls into our tale bearing neither ring nor crown, and yet turns a charge aside with hands and breath?" "A man," the stranger said, "of another world. Strong enough to help, not wise enough to rule yours." Aragorn's gaze flicked from steward to stranger and back again. He had the look of a man who had learned to count what he could spend. "We come to speak of a plan that is already in motion," he said. "A desperate plan we would not change even if 10 such as you walked our walls." Denethor's mouth whitened. "Speak it then, if you must add more smoke to a room that has little air." Gandalf spoke simply, as men do when they have set their course and will not look for another. Frodo Baggins and Samwise Gamgee, 2 halflings from the Shire, have gone by secret ways into Mordor carrying the enemy's ring. Their purpose is to cast it into the fire where it was forged. If they succeed, Sauron will be unmade. If they fail, all fails. Denethor's knuckles tapped the arm of his chair once. "And you bring this into my hall like a lantern into a straw loft. Better light than ignorance," Gandalf said. Thin as a blade. Superman's jaw set as if to accept a weight. "You don't want me to carry it," he said softly, not a question. "No," Gandalf said at once. "Not touch it. Not even hold it for a breath. It uses strength as a handle." "Then I won't," Superman said. "I don't wear crowns. I don't wear rings." Denethor's eyes narrowed, suspicious of any man who refused a lever. "If not the ring, then what do you offer beyond tricks at a gate?" "What you saw," Superman answered. "And more of it. Drills that let men make more of themselves. Speed, strength, yes, but kept within your command. Let me be your bell and your shield. Let me not be your master." Gandalf studied him. "You speak of restraint as if it were easy." "It is not," Superman said. "It is necessary. I can do many things. I cannot unbecome what I am. so I choose what I do with it." Aragorn's hand rested on the pommel of Andorral, the blade reforged. "Then you will march with us," he said simply. "We go to the Black Gate. We will draw the eye. We will buy time for small feet to cross a cruel land." Denethor laughed once, a sound made of iron filings. "To offer yourselves as meat and call it strategy. To choose the field of sacrifice," Aragorn said, "and call it duty." He looked to Superman. "Can you stand with us without turning our cause into a new obedience to your strength?" "I can stand without standing over," Superman said. Gandalf's mouth thinned and then softened by a hair. "And will you remember that magic bites what fists cannot feel?" "I've felt it," Superman said, touching the scorched place at his shoulder. "I'll take counsel. I won't pretend I'm invulnerable where I'm not." The hall exhaled. It sounded very much like a city agreeing to trust a stranger exactly as far as he allowed them to. "Then go," Denethor said. "Go and see if a city's stubbornness can be turned into victory by courage, or only into legend by need. If you come back, we will speak again. If you do not, we will still have to speak, and the words will be different." Superman inclined his head to steward and wizard and would-be king. "Maps," he said to the captain. "Signal plans, evacuation routes, and the names of the men who will hold the narrowest places. I'll be listening for them." "Why their names?" the captain asked, surprised into it. "Names carry farther than horns," Superman said. "A man stands taller when he hears his own," and so the council ended not in unity of mind but in unity of movement, which in war is often enough to keep a plan alive until it can do its work. Chapter 6. March of the West. They left Minas Tirith at dawn. A slimmer host than legends prefer, some 7,000 souls, which is to say 7,000 reasons not to be careless. Aragorn rode with Anduril Bear and the standard of the White Tree streaming, not for pride but so that men could fix their eyes on something that did not move like smoke. Gandalf rode beside him on Shadowfax's gaze eastward, weighing miles like coin. The elf and the dwarf walked tirelessly, friends in the way that outlasts the need to prove it. And above or ahead or aside, the words kept failing to pin him. Superman ranged like a hawk that had been taught not to stoop unless called. The march did not waste. Where a ford ran swift, Superman turned rocks while men held ropes. Where a cart axle snapped, he lifted while a woman bound and braced. He was careful with things as well as people. No timber splintered just because his hands could. He learned the names he had asked for. Darien, who had a laugh that embarrassed itself. Mardil, who could do a bowyer's work with a knife in a knee. Radan, who never missed the rhythm of step-step, even when fear gnawed his bootlaces. At first, the men watched him with the tight looks they keep for kings and catastrophes. Then, slowly, they let themselves get used to him the way a city gets used to a bell. It means something when it rings, but it is not the thing itself. He made a habit of returning to the column at intervals and falling into the pace beside the worst singers. A song carried better with a second voice, even a poor one. He was not a good singer, as it turned out. No one told him. It was useful. At the evening halts, he drilled what he had promised to drill. Shield walls learned to breathe. Archers learned to spend arrows where they would give arrows back. Runners learned the paths he had cut with heels on the Pelennor, and saw how such shallow workings, not even trenches really, could turn an enemy's leg without turning a man's ankle. He taught captains to call names at the right times. He did not teach them courage. They had it already. Night brought counsel. Gandalf sat with his staff across his knees and watched the stars with a man who had learned to fly, instead of only to read the sky. "You move like a Maya and speak like a farmer," he said. "I come from farmers," Superman said, "and from a world that makes machines of miracles and mistakes. Magic isn't my language. I'll need you when it speaks." "It will speak," Gandalf said, "and it will cheat." "I'll plan as if it will," Superman said, looking down at his hands, "and I'll adapt when it does." "You are vulnerable to it," the wizard said quietly. "I am," Superman said. He did not make it bravado. He did not make it confession. He made it arithmetic, so I don't meet it head-on where I can avoid it. I move the ground. I change the weather. I buy seconds for men to use. Gandalf's eyes crinkled in the way of the very old when they are pleased and do not want to encourage anyone. "You speak of service as if it were craft." "It is," Superman said. "The trick is not to mistake it for providence." "Ah," Gandalf said, pleased despite himself. And can you keep from mistaking yourself for a providence? I can try, Superman said. He looked toward the east, where a red star never slept. I've spent most of my life making sure the way I try is visible. Aragorn joined them, tired to the bone and careful not to show it. Your drills take, he said. They grumble, but they take. They need more water, Superman said, and the line for the farriers ran too long. I moved some stones and made a second bench. It should cut the weight in half. You move mountains and count hoof nails, Aragorn said, wry and grateful. Both are heavy if you carry them alone, Superman said. He didn't add, and both are lighter if you know where to put your hands. They slept when they could and marched when they must. The land rose. The hard shadow at the edge of the world drew nearer. On the last night before the Black Gate, the camp lay quiet except for the sounds of men pretending not to dream. Gandalf sat again with Superman and the talk was shorter. If it comes to choosing, the wizard said, between saving 100 in your sight and saving the one who will save all, will you trust that you don't know which is which? Superman stared at the dark. I'll trust that the one who will save all is not made of glass, and I'll act where my hands are. That will have to do, Gandalf said. It usually does. In the morning they rose. The air smelled of iron, and a storm that had forgotten rain. The Black Gate waited, shut like a mouth that had run out of patience. The west formed lines that were not meant to break, only to hold. It would be enough if small feet in far places found their way. Chapter 7. Parley with the Mouth. The Black Gate. Moran. Men called it here. Opened with the slow malice of a thing that knows it does not have to hurry. Out rode a figure in black upon a black horse with a helm that allowed the mouth to mock without eyes to feel shame. It smelled of old stone and wet iron and speeches given in caves. I am the mouth of Sauron, it said, and the voice struck the air like a whip and made it flinch. Is there any here with authority to treat? Gandalf rode forward with Aragorn. Superman stood a little behind and to the left, because symbols have geometry, and he knew better than to draw wrong lines. We come to give terms, Gandalf said, staff steady. Not to take them. The mouth laughed a sound that had scraped many throats into compliance. Terms? For beggars at a king's gate? It reached into its cloak and drew forth a small shirt of silver links that caught even this dirty light and made it think of cleaner places. This was upon the spy you sent, the halfling. Know that he suffered much and died pitifully. Superman's head tilted a fraction and the world got very quiet in his ears. He listened not to the words but to the little muscles that make words. He heard the way the liar's throat tightened on died and relaxed on pitifully, saving saliva for the savor of cruelty. He heard the breath he would not have heard if someone had drowned in ash, because ash leaves a sound behind it for a while and there was none. He heard faint and far, 2 heartbeats stubborn as mules. You're lying, Superman said. Not loud and not for the benefit of the host behind the walls. They're alive, the mouth hissed. What are you, it said, and the question had less loft in it and more fear. A man who hears better than you speak, Superman said. He kept his gaze on the bridle, not the mouth. He had learned the utility of looking at harness when a beast began to rear. Gandalf lifted his staff. Begone, he said. We need no parley. Tell your master this. The West casts no lots. We call him out to justice. Justice, the mouth sneered. You come with scraps for spears and hopes for shields. Hope is a shield, Aragorn said, if it stands behind steel. The mouth's lips peeled back. It wheeled its horse and galloped back into the gate like a crow flown into a well. Horns answered. The gate groaned wider. The plain beyond filled with movement. Orcs like ants in pitch. Trolls like siege towers sprouted legs. Southrons with banners crimsoned by dyes and not only by blood. The numbers were theater as much as threat. This was a show built to make courage small. Superman breathed once, steadying the tremor in a dozen nearby hands that would take their cue from the way his shoulders settled. Remember what you drilled, he said to those near him. Lines breathe. Names carry. Hold until the ground tells you to move. He raised no flaming sword. He lifted no crown. He floated a man's height above the dust and let the host see him so they could borrow his steadiness. And then he dropped into the work of keeping men alive long enough for a mountain to have its say. Chapter 8. Hold the line. The first wave hit like weather that had been promised for days. Shields boomed. Spears thudded. Men grunted. The air filled with dust that tasted of ash and old anger. The west line did not collapse. It flexed as taut like a lung. Superman moved as a hinge moves, not everywhere, but where the door would tear itself off if someone did not mind the torque. He deepened shallow cuts in the ground so that the enemy's mass found itself poured into pockets where arrows waited. He clapped a sound burst that stole half a breath from a charging front, and in that theft Gondor took a step it could not have taken with fear filling its mouth. He scooped a falling man and set him down where the healers worked, cloak spread and water ready because he had asked the quartermasters to think as if the dead would not oblige them by dying out of sight. Nazgul stooped, fell beast's wings casting a stink shadow. He blinded a mount with a flash and drove it off its angle. He would not bring the rider down to be claimed by prophecy or bitter accident. He had resolved that on the march and held to it now with the stubbornness of a farmer finishing a furrow in the rain. Steel found him. The blade did not look different. It felt different. A smear of cold that went into the skin and then the bone and then the good sense. He rolled his shoulder and did not let his face change. Later, when he lifted a slab of fallen timber, a man saw the scorched cloth and the thin wrongness of the line beneath and swore softly at a god who had chosen to bleed with them and did not ask for worship to do it. "Circle," came the captain's cry when the line began to pucker in too many places to mend by shouts. "Concentric. Archers in!" The West folded itself as taught, not in surrender, but in prudence. An army that admits it needs to breathe will outlive an army that pretends it does not. Superman braced the circle's weak points with small acts that mattered. He turned an ankle-breaking stone with a toe. He made sure a banner pole did not fall and become a spear in the wrong hands. He caught a thrown torch and pinched it out with fingers that could have cracked mountains. The mouth of Sauron watched from a rise, and what it saw put a new line in its face where no eyes lived. Discipline doing the work despair would otherwise have done for the other side. Time became a grindstone. It ate songs first, then cleverness, then the easy kinds of courage. What it could not eat were the things men held because someone had taught them how. Superman became less visible, more useful. He moved air to carry orders. He carried men just far enough. He did not do the work that would have taught good captains to wait for a miracle, instead of making one out of their own feet. Somewhere in it all, a Morgul arrow grazed his forearm. The chill ran quick, an ink of malice trying to write itself into his blood. He breathed out slow and sent heat through the place, his own, not the beam, and walled the wrongness off. It stayed, a thin complaint. He adjusted his work accordingly. More lifting, less catching the cursed edges. More trenching, less wrestling with the blades themselves. Adaptation is not surrender. It is intelligence. How long? A runner panted. Because men ask clocks for mercy even in a land with none. As long as it takes, Superman said, and then added the only kindness a lie can carry. Not long. And then the ground itself answered him. Chapter 9. The eye falls it began as a shiver along the soles of men's feet. Then a hum as of a great bell being tuned far away. Then the tremor lifted into the bones and rattled teeth. Heads turned, not toward the enemy but past them, beyond the black gate, to the mountains where a wound in the world had been made at the world's making. Gandalf's eyes flared. "It has begun," he said, voice half prayer. "Frodo." Superman felt it as a change in resonance, Mount Doom's roar shifting from hunger to hurt. He threw his voice as far as a man's voice can honestly go. "Back, orderly! Breathe and move!" The circles peeled open without breaking. He went where the ground had decided to become air, and held edges together with hands and gusts. He lifted cavalry trapped by falling stone and set horse and rider down as pairs. He became wind against ash, shaping it away from mouths and eyes. He shut his own eyes against the eye that flared in the east. One last swollen blaze and then an implosion like a heartbeat ending. Barad-dûr trembled. Its crown fire flickered wild and then sucked in upon itself like a candle under a jar. The tower folded in slow catastrophe. The shock rolled outward, ugly and huge. Orcs screamed in voices that belonged to other throats. Trolls stumbled and wept because they had nothing else to do, and their legs had been taken from them by a god that had run out of hate. Men in red and black dropped their pikes and ran as if running was a thing you could do across a cracking world. "Fall back," Aragorn called, voice riding the wind. He rode the line, blade lifted not for killing but for pointing the right directions. Gandalf's staff blazed, and where its light fell, men found the sense to become lines again instead of a pile of frightened bodies. Superman lifted and braced and set and blew and never once reached for triumph. Catastrophes do not need applause. At the edge of the collapsing plain before the gate, the West gathered itself and turned to watch a story end. The lands of Mordor fell in on themselves like a lie discovered. The red glare dimmed into smoke. The sound became distance. Men who had shouted their throats raw became quiet because there was nothing to say to an ending but breath. "It is done," Aragorn said finally, voice torn and beautiful. After so long, Gandalf did not smile. He looked at Superman. "Now we must not become the thing we killed." "I won't," Superman said. "And I won't help anyone else do it." A murmur moved through the host, a fragile thing made of relief and grief and the list of names already forming on a dozen lips. Superman turned away from the ruined east and back toward the work that always waited where ruin had been. Binding, carrying, counting, laying a hand on a shoulder and lending steadiness just long enough for a man to find his own again. On the ride back toward Minas Tirith, the argument that had to happen found its hour, not in a hall, in the saddle, in dust. "You could shape a world with those hands," a captain said without heat. "I could break it with them too," Superman said. "So I'll carry stones, you carry laws. And if the next darkness comes from a sky you know better than we do?" Aragorn asked, careful and honest. "Then I'll stand at your shoulder and tell you what I see," Superman said. "And do what you ask unless you ask me to be your king." "Good," Gandalf said softly. "Then we will be friends and not He let the word die. Friends was enough. Chapter 10. Songs and Schemes. Minas Tirith received them as a city that had prepared for both outcomes. The wounded found beds where women had laid linens they would wash a dozen times to bleach out what would not bleach. The dead found honor without noise. The living found work and wine. A feast rose, thin in the meat, fat in the singing. Songs spilled differently after victory than after reprieve. These had both in them and a thread of caution besides, because the West had learned not to mistake a sunrise for summer. Superman did not sit long at any table. He moved casks. He mended a hoist on the fifth circle. He took a line in hand and helped raise a banner back where wind had stolen it. In the houses of healing, he learned how to pour water without waking a man who had earned sleep the hard way. Children stalked him for a time, as children will stalk any large and improbable kindness. He let them, and when they tried to touch the cape, he held it low so they could feel the cloth. "It's just cloth," he told a boy who looked ready to weep. "The important part is the people who keep it clean." Denethor did not join the feast. He sent for Superman instead, and this time the hall felt less like a threat and more like a test that a teacher had stopped grading because he had begun to suspect his answers were not the only ones. "You have what you asked for," the steward said. "A bell, a map room, captains who listen until they decide whether you are wrong." "I asked for work," Superman said. "I'll take quiet work now." "You will not remake us with gifts we cannot refuse," Denethor said, almost hungry for the argument. "No uplifts, no engines," Superman said. "Not unless you ask for the knowledge and decide where to put it and who pays the cost." "And if we never ask?" Denethor pressed. "Then I'll carry stones and keep my mouth shut," Superman said. Something changed in the set of the steward's shoulders, as if a knot in his back had finally agreed to be a rope again instead of a bone. "You should know," Denethor said roughly, "that the city will make a legend of you whether you help them or not." "Make it a useful one," Superman said. "Not a prophecy, a reminder." Later, atop the wall where the wind had a clean edge again, he stood with Aragorn and Gandalf and watched men mend. "You'll be king," Superman said to Aragorn, no more question than the dawn. "Only if they will it," Aragorn said. "That is the only crown that sits without sliding." "Then it will sit," Superman said. "You've made of yourself the right kind of chair." Gandalf chuckled behind his beard. "He does not come from our metaphors," he said. "But he understands furniture." "I understand weight," Superman said. And then the sky answered him. Chapter 11. The second breach-it began as shimmer, a bruise in the high air that did not belong to weather. Those who had seen such a thing before shouted before they thought, and then bit their tongues so as not to scare children. On the highest tier, above the White Tower, light twisted like wire. The breach yawned, a wound more controlled than the first, less a tear and more a door someone had forgotten to close. Gandalf felt it in his bones and in his name. Aragorn felt it in the way the wind changed, and men glanced up before they knew why. Superman felt it like a remembered song played wrong by a different band. He rose until he could feel the edge without touching it. Colors from no painter's palette licked his hands and stung a little. Can you close it? Aragorn asked, voice even because a city listens to kings in waiting even before crowns sit. I can stabilize it, Superman said, or I can pass through it, and it will likely seal behind me. My being here is part of why it opens so easily. I'm a weight on a fabric meant for lighter threads. And if you stabilize it? Gandalf asked. Then it stays, Superman said. Safer but open. Others could come. Not all will be friends. I can teach you shields, watchers' tricks, not engines, not weapons you aren't ready to carry. But the choice is yours. Aragorn's hand found Anduril's hilt and did not tighten. We will face what comes as we faced what has been, together and as ourselves. Gandalf nodded. Freedom is not a luxury we put away when the guest is powerful. Superman looked from one to the other and did the arithmetic that has nothing to do with numbers. Then I will go, he said. I came unbidden. I'll leave unburdening you of my shadow. You leave us with a worse shadow, Denethor might have said on another day. Today the city said nothing and breathed. He rose to the breach. The edge hissed and then softened under his hands. He felt his own world the way a man feels the road home before he sees the lights, a frequency in the bones. He turned once, not dramatically, simply to see. Gandalf's white, Aragorn's steady, the walls that were beautiful because they had been made for people, not for myth. You could stay, said a boy's voice from a terrace below. Too far for a man's ears. Superman heard it. He smiled at nothing so that the boy would think it had been at him. I could, he said softly, and then to the ones who could hear. Thank you for letting me help. Keep your drills. Keep your names. He stepped into the light. It took him and thinned him and made a bright thread out of a strong rope. The breach narrowed, then zipped itself shut like a seam pulled by a tailor who knew his work. The scorch on the stone below would not wash out. That was good. Cities need stains to remember what they have survived. Chapter 12. Legends and the void silence followed the ceiling, the kind that holds a city's breath without demanding it. Then sound returned, tools, orders, a bird that had found its voice again when the red eye went out. Aragorn stood a while longer looking at the sky, then at the work. A king does not stare at closed doors when open ones need sweeping. Do we tell it? He asked Gandalf as they walked back toward the White Tower. The truth of him. Truth travels poorly without story, Gandalf said, and story travels poorly without a place to sit. We will tell enough to keep men from making a god where a man stood. We will not tidy the parts that don't fit a song. A golden champion who would not be king, Aragorn said. That has a place at a fire. A warning in it, Gandalf said. A lamp and a finger wagging. Good. We can use both. They paused where the scorch marked the stones below the tower. A shadow gilt in gold is still a shadow, Gandalf murmured. Hearing his own warning return to him changed. But sometimes a shadow is shade and saves a man from heat. The measure is in who holds it and why. Aragorn touched the stone with 2 fingers, the way men touch an altar when they mean to remember and not to worship. We will not be ruled by hands we did not ask to hold us, he said. And we will not refuse hands that lift without taking. Then you will be a better king than most, Gandalf said. Which is often as much as this world will allow. In Riendell and Lothlorien and Isengard, word would come in the old ways. A rider's breathless report. A bird's crooked path, a ripple in a seeing bowl. Each people would set the tale to their own tempo. In the Shire, no tale would be told yet. There would be a party before there was a history. This was right. Histories grow better in kitchens than in councils, and in the places between worlds, a man moved like a thought through a medium not built for bones. Superman felt the pull of home, the familiar hum of a son he knew how to swallow and turn into strength. He let himself take stock as he flew between one fabric and another. He had stood in a world where magic had weight and order had to make its case every morning. He had not taken. He had held. He had not commanded. He had taught. He had made railings more often than speeches. It was a good ledger to carry back. He thought of the small, brave heartbeats on the ash flats and laughed once in relief. A sound no one heard because there was only light to hear it. He thought of a steward who had learned to unclench a hand without being forced. He thought of a king who would be one because men said yes and not because men were made to. He did not regret leaving. He had made himself a promise too many years ago to break it here. Never to be the reason a people stopped deciding for themselves. But the pull of that world's courage tugged at him the way steady work tugs at a man's shoulders even when he sits down. A good ache. Light thickened. Heat kissed his face in a familiarity that was almost pain. Home, a different city, a different kind of vigilance, threats he knew by taxonomy, minds that twisted laws into cages, fists that mistook power for purpose, machines that made monsters out of needs. He would do what he always did: listen, lift, refuse crowns, carry names. Behind him, if directions meant anything where directions did not, Minas Tirith went on mending. Aragorn would be crowned. Gandalf would counsel and then wander. Songs would get some things wrong and most things right enough. Children would play a game on the fifth circle in which one ran very fast and the others pretended to be wind, and no one would win, because the point would not be to win. It would be to be out of breath together. A city's stone held a scorch mark and would not scrub it out. Someone would plant flowers along its edge. Visitors would ask what had burned there, and the teller on duty would say, "A story once," and then tell one that had the right shape, if not every right word. Somewhere far from any gate, a farmer would lift a weight and set it aside and feel a little steadier, because once he had heard his own name called in the dust and had found he could take one more step with it in his ears. Between suns, in the last thinning of the breach, Superman smiled. He had not saved a world. He had helped it save itself. There are worse labors and fewer better, he went on, a bright thread stitching his own sky back into place, cape a red line that needed no song to be true.